Hey, it's Big T. Welcome to lesson 7 on how to tie flies. Today we will be tying a stimulator, and a couple of the fundamentals we'll be focusing on. We'll be working a little bit with deer hair and or elk hair rather, and we'll be stacking that. So we'll be introducing a new tool today. It's going to be a hair stacker. So this is basically a hair stacker here that we'll be working with. And we'll be wrapping a dry fly feather, palmering that around the fly as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple things. I want to quickly talk about dry fly feathers. This is a saddle. This is a cape. The cape has a tendency to have a little bit more tapered feathers. The saddle feathers tend to be a little bit longer. I'm a saddle guy, some people are cape guys. They also have, these are considered midge saddles, and a midge saddle basically has a wider array of small fly feathers. So you're going to find more feathers that will fit your 18 to 22, 24 type flies. Whereas your traditional saddle is going to encompass some of your bigger 10 to 18s. They grade those capes and saddles. Personally, from a value perspective, and look, I'm looking for a bargain all day long, but I have not found a dry fly feather that compares to whiting. They're not cheap, but it's worth the investment because of the value you get for it. You're going to get more flies, better flotation. I like half saddles and a silver because I do tie a decent amount of dry flies, but not a ton. If you're not a big dry fly tyer, maybe go in and split one with somebody. They just have more quality feathers. As you step down below silver, the quality, it's not bad, but it's not something that I prefer to use personally. So that's my kind of take on our dry fly feather situation. Before we switch over and hone in on the tying of the fly, I'm going to show you real quick. This is a hair stacker, and you notice that comes apart. You've got a bottom and a top. The top piece has got a little wider opening. And so what we're going to do when we stack hair is we're going to take the amount that we need, and that will vary depending on the application. The beginning of this fly, we're going to use deer hair for a tail, so I'm not going to need a whole lot of that. So we would take just a small pinch, and I've cut that deer hair off of this swatch. A small pinch of that, and if you notice and can tell, the tips of that are really uneven. So I'm going to grab this with my left hand, and I'm really just going to kind of knock the ends that we cut and try and brush out any underfur that might be in there. Then I'm going to take that and place the uneven tips down and cover that with your finger, and you'll bang it a couple times. And when you undo, see if that will show better. When you undo the two pieces, you're left with an even set of tips here. So that is stacking our hair in a hair stacker. As far as other materials, we've got our dry fly feather. And I'll go over how to choose that as we switch over and get tighter in. And then we're going to use a barbless terrestrial hook on this. It's a size 8. They tend to, I had a pack of those around here, but I don't know where I stuck them. They're a little heavier gauge than a traditional dry fly hook. However, we're going to have enough buoyant materials on this fly to keep it floating. And then we're going to be using some dry fly dubbing. I will use other dubbings that are not specific to dry fly dubbings. I don't like things that are heavy with maybe a rabbit in there because it's not a buoyant. It's not as buoyant. It tends to soak up water and be heavier. But your synthetics, maybe a beaver, maybe a mink, some of the animals that are going to have natural oils that repel water well. And here's that barbless, and I think my lighting's messed up where you're not getting a good view of that. But a barbless terrestrial hook gives this fly a nice shape. We're going to switch over and start tying the fly. All right, let's get started tying our stimulator. So we're going to start with our thread, and I'm just using a 70 denier black. And we're going to start with touching turns, wrapping back down the hook shank. And I've started that just a little bit below the eye. I will say this, on your dry flies, when you're starting to tie, one of the biggest mistakes we tend to make is crowding that eye. So we may want to err on the side of caution. And I'm tying that, the terrestrial hook has a little bit of a curve, so I'm tying that to about halfway back from the hook point to the back of the hook. Now we showed you earlier how to stack that deer hair, and I'm going to take the pieces that we used for the tail, place them in my left hand. I want that tail, it's not a long tail, to stick out about the gap of the hook on this particular hook. And I'm going to come up like we've learned and do a couple of pinch wraps. Now if you notice, this hair is starting to spread out. So I'm going to do loose wraps up the hook shank to kind of tie some of those down and in real well. And I want to go up about halfway, and then I can start kind of tying off a little bit better and wrap back down. So that looks great right now, doesn't it? What we're going to do is we're going to clean this up. So I'm going to wrap backwards to my end point and secure that real well. And then I'm going to start taking my scissors and trim off, careful not to cut my thread. Which is something you'll find you'll do on occasion and drive you nuts. I'm going to trim that up and clean that up a good bit. There's a little rogue fiber there. And then I'm going to come back over with my thread and tidy it up by wrapping that down. It doesn't have to be too tidy, because we're going to come over it with some dubbing and a dry fly feather. All right, again, we kind of tie things in reverse order. So I'm going to dub this fly, and then I'm going to put some dry fly hackle on. So what I need to do is tie the hackle in first and then the dubbing. This is the dry fly feather I'm using. This is from a saddle. And I have measured this basically by putting it up on the hook. And I want the end of those fibers to be about the distance to the hook point on my hook. That's how we determine which feather to use. Now, I'm not a big stickler on that. Obviously, I want it close, but I'm not going to be crazy mad if it's not exact. I would err on the side of it being a little bit longer. And then some flies, like catskill flies, do call for a longer fiber. All right, so here's the end of my dry fly feather. I'm going to peel off the first few barbules so that I can tie that in. And I'm tying the stem in. And I want to tie, there's an underside, which is the less colored side. I want to tie the colored side, the more prominent colored side, up. And we'll tie that in, and then we'll start using our dubbing. Now, traditionally, a stimulator, you can change any color you want, uses some oranges and yellows. And so I'm going to tie in or dub in an orange body. Dry fly dubbing is really easy and nice to apply and make a dubbing noodle with. And again, a little goes a long way, so we're going to err on starting with less. We'll make touching turns. We're going to need a little bit more than that. And we're going to take that up to about the 2/3 mark. So at this point in time, we're going to begin wrapping our dry fly feather. And we just want to come over top, leaving a slight gap in between turns. And palmer this baby up. Now, you may want to leave wider gaps on some if you wish the body to show a little bit more. If you want it to be more buoyant and float better, you're going to use tighter gaps. So I've wrapped my thread behind this feather a couple times and in front before I trim it. And when I trim my feathers, I'm going to take my scissors up the stem at first and then come down and trim. That has a tendency to keep me from cutting too many other fibers from the rest of the feather. So we've got the first piece of our stimulator tied in, and now the fly calls for a deer hair or elk hair wing casing that's going to go on top. So again, I'm going to take a little bit more of the deer hair, but you still don't need a ton. I'm going to call it, say, a pencil width, roughly a pencil width of hair. Let's see if that'll show there. Something like that. I'm going to clean the back end of this, just where I cut, and try and brush out any of the under fur. I'm going to place the tips into my stacker. And then beat it a couple times so that I even up my fibers. Got a rogue one here that I can discard. I'm going to take them out with my left hand and transfer to my right. Okay, now that I've got my deer hair or elk hair in place, I'm going to look and see where I want that wing case. And I want it to come to the back of this fly before the tail, which would be right there. And so now I'm going to transfer that exact area over to my other hand. So when I place that on top and do a couple of very loose turns at first, and then pull straight down on that, because it's going to flail out, and I don't want to do that until I've gotten a couple good loose turns, and wrap forward slightly on that. So we've got our wing, and we've got a big mess up front that we need to trim out. So I'm going to pull these up, and I'm going to come up at a slight angle and start trimming these extra pieces of hair. You want to make sure that you've got everything trimmed up behind that eye. So we don't want any of this crowding the eye. Once we've done that, we're going to make thread wraps and really start to cover this well. All right, there is our wing case for our stimulator. We're now going to come back and take that same dry fly feather and we're going to tie it in once again right in front of that wing case. Again, we've peeled some of the barbs off so that we could tie the stem in, and now I'm going to apply some yellow dubbing up to the front part of this fly. This is where you just need to be careful and not crowd that eye. Add a little bit more to make sure we get that covered. All right. Same technique, palmering this feather around. I'm going to make, in this case, about 3 turns. I'm going to come over top a couple times and then a couple in front and trim the feather off. Again, starting up and then kind of sliding down that stem. On dry flies, I like to use a half hitch for my knot. And the reason is the half hitch tool will allow me, if I have any feathers kind of sticking forward, oftentimes it allows me to push those back a little bit and tighten things up so that I do have a good open eye to tie my fly on with. So that's it. If you want, apply a little Zap-A-Gap to your thread before you do that. And the finished product is a dry fly called a stimulator that you can use alone, especially when stone flies are around, or you can float a nymph below it. Hope this is helpful and you have enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my network and visit my website, Big T Fly Fishing, for more tutorials, fishing tips, and products for your fly fishing and tying needs.